All right, I'm here to talk about adaptability in the iron triangle. Hopefully I don't screw this up. All right, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Tim Bourne. I work at Cerebral Fix, based in Christchurch. I've been there for the last 10 years. Cerebral Fix is 11 years old, so when I started, it was relatively in its infancy. And also the studio was, kind of had an average age of about 20, 21 around that period of time, and now 10 years later it's 30 to 31, so it's somewhat growing alongside myself. And I had a really interesting journey into video games. I used to be a corporate consultant here in Wellington. I didn't like that. So I decided to join Cerebral Fix about a month before the big earthquake. I joined in the core infrastructure team as a web developer and thought that was really cool. And then the earthquake happened and a lot of my consulting role kind of shifted into helping with infrastructure. Somehow, strangely, I ended up in account management and working with our clients, and then started doing a whole bunch of project management, and then kind of shifted really heavily into managing our clients and helping them with their projects and helping to support the development of the projects that we work on. Through to now, where my role is as president of Cerebral Fix. I'm supported by an amazingly talented leadership team and equally amazingly talented employees, many of which are in this room ready to throw things at me. And we've been together a long time and done amazing things, and it's this kind of new journey for Cerebral Fix where we're going. And so, for those that don't know who Cerebral Fix are, we're mostly a work-for-hire studio, so we don't make our own games. We end up working for some of the biggest companies in the world, helping to make their games work and to kind of bring them to life. Equally means we don't get to talk a lot about the projects that we work on because of their natural sensitivities, but we get to work on some really cool stuff, and we love it. That's good. But working with all of these massive entertainment giants has its series of challenges as well. While it's all fun, they do have really high expectations for the work that we do. Their quality is critical. They're not going to let any of their franchise IPs diminish in any capacity, so they hold the quality bar really high. Typically deadlines are really immovable. They might have a project that's aligned with a movie coming out, or we do quite a lot of work in the theme park space, so they might have something that's going live whether you want it to or not. And so a lot of the time it's very much, okay, this is the date and we have to work to that. Creative decisions change frequently. Sometimes that's because something's still in development, and so it naturally will change until they finish what they're doing. If you're working on anything to do with a movie or a film, until they cut it, it's still in progress. And so we've had times where, oh look, the whole character has changed from what it was originally, and now we have to remodel something in the 11th hour to get it into the game. Happens somewhat frequently. And franchise approvals can be a massive roadblock. So, getting the work that we have done creatively here in New Zealand signed off by franchise approvers, especially if you're working with any kind of specific characters that have only a few people in the world who can sign them off. There are a bunch. Mickey Mouse is one, for example, where there's only a couple of people, and if that person's on holiday, you better hope that you got it in time. Yeah, there's a whole lot of kind of franchise work that goes on, and our team's done an amazing job over the years of figuring out how to kind of align themselves with getting franchise approvals. But that kind of leads into the Iron Triangle. So part of what this talk is about is really the Iron Triangle. This is a tool that's used by project managers and producers as a means to assess how their project is going. So, the idea is, if you've ever heard the saying, cheap, good, fast, pick two. It's effectively this. And so the idea is that, you've got your cost, your time, and your scope, and those are all constraints that you can move around, but they will affect the quality in the middle. So, if you take away all of the time and don't change anything else, it's going to have an impact. If you take away, all of the scope or, increase the scope dramatically, it's going to detriment everything. And so it's just a means to assess how a project is going, and changes in one constraint necessitate changes in another, or you're going to have to make compromises and sacrifice. But the challenge is, what if quality can't be compromised? You're working with the biggest companies in the world, there is no quality compromisation. It's got to be the best it can be. Typically, the time can't be moved. This project is going to happen, and it's going to be released on the day it needs to be released on. Most of the time, cost is fixed, and even outside of that, even if you were able to get more funds, throwing more people at a project doesn't necessarily make it better. Sometimes it makes it worse. So you have to kind of, use it sparingly as to how you want to do things. And then creative decisions change frequently. Typically, the scope only ever increases because people think of better ways that they want the product to be. So, it's this ever-growing scope management. And for us at Cerebral Fix, crunch is unacceptable. The easy answer looking at this is to be like, let's work more with the people we've got, but we don't want to do that. We don't want to be sacrificing our personal lives or any of our personal endeavors for the means of an ever-changing scope and immovable deadlines that we can't control. So, making a hard stand that's where we sit. And so the answer isn't always no. There's an easy scenario which is no, we can't change anything. No, we're not going to add anything more. No, you can't have what you want. The project is going to be what we scoped, and that's it. But unfortunately, no isn't conducive of creativity. It doesn't make the best product. At the end of the day, everybody is trying to make the best thing for the player, and no is just a means in which to control your scope. And so that goes both ways. It's the scope that you're going to bring on, but equally the scope that you've committed to, which should always be changing. It's how Agile works as well. The idea that you should be reassessing what it is that you want to deliver. So the answer isn't always no, it's how. And part of that is about having the discussion. And so I lead into this. So scope management becomes your number one priority. If anyone who's worked on a project with a whole lot of scope creep, this guy is pretty common. It's like, why is all this stuff being added? Why do I need to have this in the game? And so the important thing around scope management is really about understanding the context behind scope. Why is somebody asking for this? What is the why? What is the reason that this is so important, and why should we be assessing it or thinking about it at all? And so part of this for me is, as scope changes come in, assessing the level of effort, even if your immediate reaction is to say no. No, we can't do this. Because what if that feature turns out to be something that allows you to shift something else out of the scope? What if that's something that allows you to still deliver the why, but in a lesser way? So scope management becomes the thing that stops you from having crunch, that allows you to meet your deadlines. Everything becomes about managing that scope and being intelligent and being creative about how you want to do that. And so the important piece to not end up like this guy is really everyone is trying to make the best possible thing. And so sitting down and having that discussion, that reality that is, we want to make the best thing, what are the things that we have the power over to control, and how do we make that happen? Not always accepting the scope creep, but equally not pushing it away and saying no to everything because you want to have the best product. And so part of that is being adaptable. Knowing your scope, your team capabilities and risks, understanding the context of features, brainstorming alternative solutions to meet the same goal, involving everyone that it impacts in the discussion, be creative in sitting down and figuring out with everybody that's involved, what could we do? So you've got brainstorming. Everybody that works on a project is highly intelligent, highly creative, and has a whole bunch of other solutions as to how you might deliver a means of a project. This isn't necessarily designed by committee, but it is taking the expertise that you've got on a project and figuring out, okay, well, what is something else we could do? And so for a lot of us in working with our clients, we end up having creative teams on the other side, on the client side, that we will sit down and equally work together on some creative solutions and compromises to still meet the goal. And so then identifying where scoped functionality could be simplified or reduced. So this is looking at your game as you've got it right now and knowing that things are going to change. So what could you address at this point in time? What could you adjust in your scope? And what could you re-simplify to allow for something else that might be more important to come in and join the fold? I'm just trying to check my slides. I think I've got the old slides, but this will still work. Excellent. So, some examples. I wanted to talk through some hilarious examples we've had over the years. Obviously, I can't go into too much detail about the specific projects or what we did, but these were some real scenarios that we had where people asked us some questions. So, we were in the 11th hour of a project we were working on. It was a 3D game, and they came to us and said, "Hey, We want to increase the number of 3D modeled characters from 3 to 10. These are all animated, these are all in the game, and every single one of them has a unique animation for how they might fail or what they do. So huge overhead. I want to say that we were really smart, and we, discussed with them the notion that, hey, we're going to simplify these models, we're going to use a single rig, we're going to do this stuff. Instead, we didn't, and we hurt, and that was the last project that we really had a large amount of crunch on. That was our learning experience for what not to do. Don't say yes when they ask you that. And so actually we did deliver, and we delivered everything really well. And then in retrospect, we kind of sat down and thought, well, if we'd known earlier in the project, if we'd known that we were going to be able to be asked to do that, then we could have done a lot more to make that impact really low. We could have taken the single rig we were working on and made that work for the characters and pushed that out. We could have not done 10, we could have done 7 or 6 or any other number that's not 3. And the reason for that was a big push from franchise that really they were still working on the film that we were working on, and they had all these characters that then finally became important. It's like, yeah, start this game, these are the only people we'll tell you about, but then later on, hey, look, there's these other people we should have told you about. Hey, get this done, it still needs to be done on time. And so at that point in time, throwing more people at the problem wasn't going to help. We had a finite amount of time, and the ability for us to rig and animate everything was going to be challenging. And again, because all of these characters had so many unique animations, we could have compromised on not doing as many unique animations. We could have shifted that to have one animation that gets shared for each of the different types of events rather than many. So compounded by the notion that we wanted to make the best thing. And so largely that's where crunch comes from. Crunch is the notion that we have a passion to all make the best possible product. And if I do just this little bit more, if I push this a little bit faster, if I just stay late to get this thing done, it's going to make the better product. A person's individual perspective is helpful, but actually taking this step back and looking at the entirety of the scope that you've got to deliver, and why is this little bit here more important than potentially all the other bits that you've got that you really want to get in. So prioritization of that scope is really the only way that you can allow scope management to not affect you in a detrimental way. It becomes a disaster very quickly. And so that was our first kind of big learning experiences. We got hurt, we crunched a whole lot, we delivered that project, it was a wild success, and it formed the foundation of a whole lot of the relationships we have now. I still don't know if it was worth it. For those few months, it was really painful. But we learned from that, and so now when we go into the relationships with our clients, we've gotten better at understanding the scope and the scope management that we have and how we work with them, and also anticipating the changes that they're going to have. So the next example we had is, we noticed in testing that people don't use this feature. Let's just remove it and build this other feature. That was actually basically the same thing. And so for us, typically those comments will come from like an executive review. So, the producer we're working with has decided to take the game to an executive. They sit down, they assess the game, and then they go, oh, I need to give some feedback. I didn't play with this thing, it mustn't be there. Or they'll have a testing team and there'll be something not in the game. And so we had an example, we had a kind of built a leaderboard system inside of the game that allowed for you to kind of see the progress of other players, but it required you to kind of interact with it a little bit more than what the player wanted. And so they effectively wanted to scrap that feature and build another leaderboard feature outside of the game, where we had already done all the work and kind of come into a finish. So we sat down with them and instead said, well, okay, what if we just extend the period of the game at the start to allow us to surface the leaderboard, which was enough for people to see, hey, look, this leaderboard gets shown, I can now see where my progress is, what my target's going to be, and then it can fold down and I can play the game. So by adding a 10-second wait, we avoided building an entire new feature, which is just huge, and very thankful for all the people that worked on the project. But that's what it comes down to, is there is always another alternative solution. It's not always necessarily what somebody has proposed is the solution that you should take. We're all smart people. And then the last one, which is kind of my favorite, I know that I asked for you to design it this way, but now that I'm playing with it, can we change it to the design you originally proposed? Which it's fun. Yeah, we did this awesome, cool design, and you know, loved it, and then you changed it a whole lot, and then we built it, and then you hated it. Cool. In this example, we knew that they were going to do that because you look at your design and you go, yeah, this is really great, and what you've proposed is not really great. So what we're going to do is we're going to build for ours to support yours. So that meant that the shift in time to move from what they had designed back to ours was half a day. So it was much easier than having to scrap that entire feature and rebuild an entire new feature. And a lot of that is really about adaptability. The theme of this entire, the conference is really, how can you be adaptable inside of your projects? How can you look at what's going on within your scope and within everything that, your team is doing and find better ways to adapt to the things that you've got going on. Even in Cerebral Fix at the moment, we've been looking at some really unique ways of doing, animation with 2Ds, 2D stills to kind of use AI to drastically reduce the amount of work that we then need to do. It's fairly amazing, but actually if you look at that on a project, how you might utilize that could save hundreds of hours of animators having to do work. So what are some unique ways that you can adapt inside of the projects you have to shift some of the core features that you're working on? And so what does being adaptable look like? There was once upon a time in Cerebral Fix's history where I didn't do any of these things. And so my adaptability was to stress and to run around and try and get things done. But actually it's a lot about not stressing. And the reality is there's always going to be change. Doesn't matter what project you work on, the moment you start cutting code and developing and building the thing, it's going to change. It's never going to end up the same thing that you wanted it to be. And that's a good thing. It's what happens with creativity and people working together on a project. And so then usually change has a good reason. I say usually because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's the most passionate and loudest person in the room saying the game must have this thing. So being able to take the step back and actually look at your scope and reassess, hey, well, is this the best thing that we need? We've got a whole lot of features. How do we prioritize them? How do we take this thing that you're asking for and fit that into what we've got to deliver? And the thing that actually helped me a lot in my career was players don't know about the features they didn't get. So you've decided to scrap something and you're really disappointed about it, but actually the players never knew they were going to have that feature anyway. So once you've delivered the game, they don't know that they lost out. And that can be really important when you are having those discussions and getting all passionate about why this might be more important than something else. It's really thinking about the player. What is the experience you want them to have? And while we want to build the grandest games and have all of the features in the world, what are the core things that need to be there? And then the things that they missed out on can always come later. They can always be added. They can always be additive. How can that help to reduce your stress in potentially taking on that change and adapting and evolving? And then the second piece for me is really communication is key. Listen and understand the why. And that's communication both in our world, both with our clients that we have and all their design teams and everyone we work with, as well as our internal teams. How do we discuss internally among one another to understand why we might want to do something? And starting that journey of kind of brainstorming alternate solutions, sitting down and discussing, okay, what is another way that we could achieve this? The answer isn't always no, it's how. And involve everyone it affects in the process. There's a lot of teams that I worked with and a lot of our clients where they absolve the team from the design decisions. So a bunch of designers sit in a room and decide the game needs to have this, and then they go to the team and they say, do this. Unfortunately, that doesn't really help. What you want to have is everybody that it affects in the conversation so that it can be designed to the best possible extent and also be adapted to have the most minimal impact as possible. It's like okay, yeah, let's build this massive leaderboard system and interconnect it with a whole lot of third parties, or we could just build our own and have a database that we connect to, and we save ourselves weeks worth of development effort. Sitting down and actually designers and everybody understanding the different complexities about the way the project was built and what we can and can't do to flex that around. I'm missing 2 other slides, but they're gone. They basically wanted to do a recap on, you've got the iron triangle, which is really a tool for assessment. It's a tool for looking at a project. In our case, we can't move a lot of things. In other, studios and other projects, they are more movable. So for us, it's meant that we've had to get really good at that scope management. And I would suggest that in reality, scope management is the thing that you have the most power and control over. Typically, you're not going to be just adding people to the team or elongating the time that you're working on something. Doing that has oftentimes a much larger effect than adjusting the scope. So sitting down and really assessing that scope that you've got and how you can, there's a lot going on the screen, and how you can flex that around, how you can, must have, should have, nice to have a project, but then even beyond that, look at those features in their entirety and how can you adjust what they are to deliver a high quality and low for each of them. And then, not every project is the same, but my hope is that, adaptability in its own right and just being able to work with many other people. I've talked a lot to people at this conference so far who have talked about the T, the T shape of growth, where somebody's got a specialization and then they spread into the areas on either side of them. So you might have artists who are also looking at animation and development, and they're starting to get those skills, which allow them to have the better conversations with their peers about how they might execute and do something. I'd say for a lot of us at Cerebral Fix, it almost goes a little wider than that. There's a lot of spread of generalization about how we might deliver something, a lot of understanding. A lot of our teams do 20-person brainstorm sessions about how they might solve a problem, because everybody is involved and everybody does have an understanding of the project. And the most powerful thing that we've found is by having that layer of transparency, by devoiding the isolation, we've gotten better at our ability to kind of manage our clients and to have open and honest conversations with them. Communication is one of the key things that makes any studio operate, and it's the thing that will help you in any kind of scope management or being adaptable. And the last piece in this slide, which was missing, which I added, was just about being creative. We're all in this industry because we want to make creativity, we want to make fun, we want to make things that are enjoyable for players. And on the creativity side, we can be creative in more ways than just what our role dictates. Sitting down and understanding more about how we might want to achieve something allows us to, extend that creativity really far. Questions? Well, that wasn't too bad. Hello.
So obviously being only able to really adjust scope, I imagine that leads to really having a strong grasp of the level of effort for what's required to be delivered. How do you approach determining that? What processes do you go through?
Yeah, and I would, so for those who didn't hear, this is about kind of assessing the level of effort of scope and how do we do that. It's something that's evolved a lot over our last 10 years, especially in contracts where you're saying, this is the level of effort, this is what it's going to cost, now we're going to go deliver it and we can't change that number later. More recently, we've kind of got a really good process of trying to break down a scope into its core parts, sitting down with the development teams who have a fairly broad understanding of how we might deliver things now, and doing t-shirt sizing at as small an increment as we possibly can to understand something. We'll always be wrong. There's always going to be flexibility, but it's about understanding that level of risk. And so in our scoping documents, we have all of our t-shirt sizes of all of the features and functionality that we plan to work on and all of the risks associated with that. And then we work with our clients to try and absolve ourselves of as many of those risks as possible. And then we try and buff those numbers at least a little bit to give us some flexibility. What's worked for us really well, and something we've been able to do, is to over-resource some of our teams to allow some extra flexibility, which allows for when things might change or go wrong, there's a little bit more buffer there. But again, assessing that scope is really important, and it's something we've been doing for a very long time, and I feel like we're fairly good at, but the ever-evolving change in scope means that will forever have to be a work in progress. Hi.
Do you have any tips for when you're on the other side of the equation, and even as your business is paying someone to do something for you, and you've got those constraints, is there any kind of tips around making it easier for the other side? Does that make sense?
So for if somebody is kind of paying us to do stuff the other way, I would say that if we were contracting work out, for example, for us, we would probably still want to understand that level of effort before we contracted it out. So actually doing that scoping exercise and understanding some of that flexibility. Whenever we do scoping, we involve as many of the disciplines as we can in that discussion. And so that allows us to make sure we really understand, what it is we're going to be asking somebody to do, so that there's less gray area for them. If we're asking somebody to actually do a piece of work, then we want to understand it in its entirety as well. And I would say that where we really started to take our strides in our relationships with a lot of our clients was initially we used to just work with a producer, and the producer would be the filter of everybody who has an opinion, all the stakeholders of whatever project we're working on. And that's probably the same if you were to do some contracting. You'd have a producer on your side and they would be the one point of contact, but everybody else on the team has a lot of opinions. So when we started to detach from the producer and actually build relationships with the broader team internally, then we started to get far better results in our understanding of what they were actually looking for. So for us now, with all of the projects we work on, all of our teams have a Slack channel that includes the entirety of the team that we work with on the other side. There is no funnels of communication. Everything is transparent, one-to-one as much as possible. Developers can ask developers intelligent questions. Artists can ask artists intelligent questions. It doesn't have to be, go through one person to misinterpret one thing that potentially blows out a project. So there's definitely layers of transparency that I think help with that a lot. Any other questions? Hello at the back. Yeah, I mean, I'd say being agile in general, all of the agile processes that we implemented over the years, thanks to Nadia and many others who are out here, actually became super helpful for our ability to adapt. It's all about a changing and evolving, ever-changing scope from the moment you start. And so I don't think we would be in the same place without the processes that we have. What's more surprising to me is for a lot of the clients we work with, some of the biggest in the world, their processes are far more archaic than ours. Most of the time they don't have great process. They believe that they're agile, but actually don't do anything that's agile in the slightest. They might do a stand-up in the morning, and that's about what they've got. And so we've gone on a journey of trying to educate our clients into how we want to work with them so that we can kind of work together. So agile in its entirety, maybe. And I would say, we're definitely not perfect. There isn't anybody who's probably got agile implemented perfectly, but the way we've got it for us works for the studio. Cool. 1 minute left. Hello.
Right now, after implementing all these processes, did you reduce contract negotiation at the beginning after building trust with those studios?
Yeah, definitely. I think I find it interesting now. A lot of the contracts that we work on are become really fast. They're like, oh, we want this thing, and you quickly go into scoping and then quickly end up, which does create another challenge as you're doing your scoping quickly, which you shouldn't do. So it's balancing that out. But definitely for a lot of the people we work with for a long time, we've recently had a big project over the last kind of 5 or 6 years that ended up with maybe 20 different contracts inside of it for pieces of work. And the later half of that became really fluid. They were just like, here's a design, here's the scope, we know you guys are going to be great at delivering this, so this is what we've got, and it would just quickly turn into a project. Typically, the biggest thing for me now is trying to make sure that we take the time to scope adequately so that we don't end up getting hurt later down the project. And I think especially, us as a business, we're shifting out of just doing games to doing more LBEs and interactive experiences, which then brings in new technological challenges and mediums that we are still assessing. So that creates another element of risk that we have to make sure that we account for during our scoping exercises. Cool. I think I'm out of time. It's dragging me off. All right. Thank you for coming, everyone.